For 19 years, another man's name was on the bridge I built, and I never said a word, and I want to tell you why I stayed quiet and what finally made me speak, because it was not ambition and it was not bitterness. It was a crack. Stay with me, because I want to tell you how a man who never turned a single bolt on that structure took the credit, the promotion, and the legacy for the work of my hands and my mind, how I let him for almost 2 decades, and how the one thing he stole ended up being the one thing that could have destroyed him if I had let it on the day that bridge began to move. My name is Nate Okafor, and I am an engineer, and I need to tell you what that word actually means before I tell you the rest, because most people think engineering is about building things, and it isn't, not really. It's about knowing what will fail and when and why and refusing to let it. Anybody can make a thing stand up on a sunny day. An engineer is the person who lies awake thinking about the worst day, the ice storm and the overloaded truck and the flood and the 40 years of small stresses all arriving at once, and who designs so that on that worst day the thing holds. Nobody ever thanks you for the disaster that didn't happen. That is the whole job. You spend your life preventing things that, if you do your job right, no one will ever know were possible. I want to tell you about the bridge. It was the biggest project of my career, a river crossing that a whole region depended on, and I was the lead design engineer on it, which meant I was the one who actually did the work, the calculations, the load analysis, the material specifications, the 1,000 decisions that determine whether a bridge is a bridge or a future headline. And I was good at it. I am not a boastful man, and I have spent my life being quiet, but I will tell you plainly because it matters to the story. I was very good at it, and that bridge is standing safe today because of specific choices I made and fought for, and one choice above all, which I'm going to tell you about because it is the heart of everything. And above me was Grady Pohl. Grady was the project manager, my supervisor, the man whose name went on the top of everything. And I want to be fair because the world is not made of pure villains, and Grady had real skills. He could talk to clients. He could stand in a room full of officials and make them feel confident. He could manage a budget and a schedule and keep the money flowing, and those things matter. A project needs a Grady. But Grady Pohl could not have performed a load calculation to save his life, and I mean that almost literally because the calculations I'm talking about were exactly the kind that save lives. And he did not do them, could not check them, and did not, in his heart, fully understand them. He understood one thing perfectly, though. He understood how to stand next to a finished thing and be photographed. Here is how it worked, and it worked so smoothly that for a long time I didn't even resent it. I did the engineering. Grady presented the engineering. In the meetings, the ideas were mine and the voice was his. When the design won an award, Grady accepted it and gave a warm speech about his team, and I was somewhere in the back being part of his team. When the bridge opened, it was Grady at the ribbon, Grady in the newspaper, Grady's name that the officials remembered, and 3 years later it was Grady who got the big promotion to a regional directorship on the strength of a bridge he could not have designed if his life depended on it. I was at that opening. I want to tell you about it because it is the one time the quiet almost broke me. I stood in the crowd with my wife, off to the side, and I watched Grady cut the ribbon, and I watched the officials shake his hand, and I heard a man near me, a stranger, point up at the bridge and tell his son, "A fellow named Pohl built that. Remember that name." And my wife, who knew, who always knew, took my hand and squeezed it hard, and she leaned over and whispered the only thing that got me through that day. She said, "The bridge knows. That's all. The bridge knows." And I looked up at the thing I had made, spanning that river, carrying those first cars, holding exactly as I had made it to hold, and I thought, yes, the bridge knows who built it. And I decided that was enough, and for 19 years it was enough, until the day the bridge finally got to say so out loud. And I stayed a senior engineer, and I trained the next people, and I did the next bridge, and I watched a man build an entire prestigious career standing on top of work that was mine. And you're waiting for me to tell you I was consumed with rage about it, and here is the honest truth. I wasn't, not for a long time, and I need to explain why, because it's important. Partly it was who I am. My father came to this country with nothing, and he taught me that the work is the reward, that you do the thing right because it is right, not because someone claps, and that a man who needs the credit doesn't love the work, he loves himself. My father laid tile. He was a craftsman, and I remember once, when I was a boy, watching him spend an extra hour on a section of floor under a built-in cabinet, a section that was going to be covered, that no human eye would ever see once the cabinet went in. And I asked him why. Why do the hidden part perfectly when nobody will ever know? And he stopped, and he looked at me, and he said, "I'll know, and the floor will know. And someday, 50 years from now, some other man is going to pull that cabinet out, and he's going to see whether I was honest or not when I thought nobody was looking. That man is who I work for. That is the whole of my father in one sentence, and it is the whole of me, and it is why I could let Grady have the ribbon and the newspaper for 19 years and not lose a single night's sleep. I was not working for the ribbon. I was working for the man who would someday pull out the cabinet, and as it turned out, that man arrived 19 years later with measurements and a crack and a very frightened face, and he found the floor honest because I had done the hidden part right when nobody was looking. And I believed that, and I still do. And partly, if I'm fully honest, it was fear. Grady was my boss. He controlled my reviews, my assignments, my future. Men who make a fuss about credit get labeled as difficult, as not team players, and they stop getting the good projects, and I had a family and a mortgage and I wanted to keep doing the work I loved, and the price of doing it was letting Grady be the face of it. So I paid the price. For 19 years I paid it quietly, and I told myself it didn't matter because I knew the truth, and the bridge stood, and that was enough. But I want to tell you about the one decision because it is the thing that changed everything, and I have to explain a little so you understand what was really at stake. Late in the design of that bridge, I found a problem. It was subtle, the kind of thing that doesn't show up unless you're the sort of person who lies awake thinking about the worst day. It had to do with how the structure would behave over decades, under a specific combination of stresses that most people would consider unlikely, a slow accumulating thing rather than a dramatic one. And addressing it properly was going to cost money and time, real schedule delay, on a project where Grady was being praised precisely for keeping money and schedule under control. The easy thing, the thing that would have kept everyone happy in the short term, was to note it as an acceptable risk and move on. Lots of people would have. The numbers were arguable. You could have written a defensible memo either way. I would not do it. I insisted on the fix. And Grady fought me on it hard because it made his budget look worse, and we had the only real argument of our 19 years over it. And I told him plainly that I would not put my name on a structure with that vulnerability in it, that I would not be able to sleep, and that if he overruled me I would document my objection in writing to the people above us both. And that threat, the threat of a paper trail, is the only reason I won, because Grady did not want a written record of himself overruling his lead engineer on a safety matter. So he relented, grumbling, and made sure everyone knew the delay was engineering's fault, my fault, and I let him say it because I didn't care whose fault the delay was. I cared that the bridge would hold. And here is the thing that mattered, the thing that would sit in a file for 19 years. When I made that fix, I documented it. Fully. Properly. The way you're supposed to. There was a formal design change with my analysis attached, dated, signed, explaining exactly what the vulnerability was, exactly why the change was necessary, and exactly what would happen if it were ignored. It went into the official project record, the permanent one, the one that outlives everybody. Grady's name was on the top of the project, but that specific document, the one that identified the danger and specified the cure, was mine, in my hand, with my analysis and my signature and my date. Grady never read it carefully. Why would he? It was engineering. It was my job. He filed it and forgot it and went to accept an award. 19 years passed. And then, last year, the bridge began to move. Not dramatically. A crack, noticed during a routine inspection, and some measurements that showed movement where there should not have been movement, and the thing that every engineer dreads and every official panics over, the question of whether a major bridge that thousands of people cross every day is safe. There was an emergency review. There was press. There were very frightened people in suits who suddenly needed to understand a structure they had spent 19 years taking for granted, and the question underneath all of it, the question that would determine careers and lawsuits and whether the bridge lived or died, was simple and terrible. Was this a design failure? Had the bridge been built wrong? And if so, who was responsible? And I want you to understand what that question meant for Grady Pohl, because this is where his 19 years of stolen credit came due. Because Grady had spent 2 decades being the man who built that bridge. He had taken the award for it, the promotion for it, the entire prestige of it. His name was on the top of everything. He was, by his own long insistence, the author of that structure. And now that structure was cracking, and the world wanted to know who to blame, and there is a brutal justice in this that I want you to sit with. You cannot take the credit for the sunny day and refuse the responsibility for the storm. If Grady was the man who built the bridge when it won awards, then Grady was the man who built the bridge when it cracked. The credit and the liability are the same object. He had spent 19 years grabbing one end of it, and he never understood that he was also holding the other. Grady came to me. Of course he did. After 19 years of being the face, the first time there was danger instead of glory, he came down to my office and he was gray and he was frightened and he needed the engineer again, the way he'd always secretly needed the engineer, and he said, "Nate, you have to help me. They're saying it's a design failure. They're going to hang this on me." And I looked at the man who had taken my life's work and worn it like his own suit for 2 decades, standing in my doorway terrified, asking the man he'd erased to save him. If you have listened this far, let me ask you what I had to decide in that moment, because it was the whole question of my life. Grady had stolen 19 years of credit that belonged to me, and now the thing he'd stolen had turned dangerous, and the truth was sitting in a file with my name on it, and I could tell that truth in a way that saved him, or in a way that buried him, or I could simply stay silent and let the investigation reach him on its own. I held, in that moment, the exact revenge that 19 years of quiet swallowing had earned me. So tell me in the comments what you would have done, because a part of me had waited 19 years for a moment just like this, and it would have been so easy, so clean, to let the man who took the credit finally take the blame. Here is what I did. I told the truth. The whole truth, exactly as it was, which turned out to be the most devastating thing I could possibly have done, and the most honorable at the same time. Because I went to the emergency review and I brought the file. My file. The 19-year-old design change, dated and signed in my hand, that identified this exact vulnerability and specified the exact fix. And I explained to that frightened room what it was. And here is the thing that a lot of people expected, and that did not happen. The bridge was not built wrong. The crack, when they finally understood it, was not from my design at all. It was from something else, from a maintenance failure over the years, from inspections that had missed things, from the slow neglect that a structure suffers when everyone assumes it's fine because it was always fine. The bridge was moving because it had not been cared for, not because it had been designed badly. And my 19-year-old document proved that the original engineering had specifically anticipated and guarded against exactly the category of long-term risk everyone was now panicking about. The design had done its job. The design had, in fact, been unusually careful, precisely because of the fight I'd had with Grady 2 decades earlier. So my file did 2 things at once in that room, and I did not have to say a single unkind word to accomplish either of them. It saved the bridge because it showed the design was sound and pointed the investigation toward the real problem, which could be fixed. And it revealed, quietly, completely, without accusation, who had actually done the engineering. Because there was my name on the critical safety analysis dated 19 years ago. There was my signature on the fight to make the bridge safer. And there, on the top of the project, on all the awards and the press and the promotion, was Grady's name, attached to a document he had opposed, describing an analysis he could not have performed, protecting against a failure he had never understood. I did not accuse Grady of anything. I just brought the truth, and the truth had a date on it, and the date was 19 years before he came to my doorway frightened. Everyone in that room was an engineer or worked with engineers, and everyone in that room understood instantly what they were looking at, which was the real author of the bridge, finally visible, holding the very document that both exonerated the design and quietly demolished 2 decades of a lie no one had ever thought to question. Let me tell you how it ended. The bridge was repaired properly because now everyone understood what it actually was and what it actually needed. Grady was not destroyed in a dramatic way, because that is not how these things go. But something quieter and more complete happened to him. Everyone knew now. You cannot unknow a thing like that. The regional director who had built the famous bridge was revealed, in one review, in front of the people whose opinion he cared about most, to be a man standing on another man's work, and he quietly retired not long after, and at his small send-off he gave a speech about his career, and he did not mention the bridge, could not mention the bridge, because the bridge had become the thing that everyone in the room now understood he had not built. His whole legacy went silent in his own mouth. And me? I did not get the 19 years back. That is not how it works. But something happened that mattered more than a promotion. In that industry, in that region, among the people who actually understood, it became known quietly, the way real reputations are always made, that the bridge was Okafor's bridge. That the man who'd saved it and the man who'd designed it were the same man, and that he'd been sitting there being quiet for 19 years. And young engineers started asking to work with me, and being taught by me became a thing that meant something, and I found late that the credit I had never chased came to me anyway, in the only form that ever mattered, which was the respect of the people who knew what the work actually was. My name is Nate Okafor, And here is the one thing I need you to carry out of this. Do the work right and document it even when someone else is taking the credit, especially when someone else is taking the credit. Because credit and responsibility are the same object, and the person grabbing all the glory in the good times is also, whether they understand it or not, holding all the blame for the bad times, and the bad times come to every structure and every project and every lie eventually. You do not have to fight for the credit. You just have to do the work honestly and keep the record, and let time do the rest, because a signed, dated truth sitting quietly in a file is the most patient thing in the world, and it will wait 19 years without complaint for the single day when it is the only thing that matters, and on that day it will speak for you louder than you could ever have spoken for yourself. So let me leave you with the question I still turn over. I could have used that file to destroy Grady, and instead I used it to tell the truth, and the truth destroyed him anyway, gently, completely, all by itself. So tell me honestly in the comments. Is it revenge? If all you did was finally stop hiding what was always true? Because I didn't take anything from Grady Pole that day. I just stopped protecting him from the one thing he'd been running from for 19 years without ever knowing it was there. Sitting in a file in my handwriting, waiting.